So welcome to the KDD plenary panel. We have a really fun set of panelists here today. We're hoping for angst and controversy and maybe some damaged relationships. And so we hope the audience will play a role also in all of that. Our topic is the future of artificially intelligent assistants. I'm Andrew Tompkins. This is Muthu Muthukrishnan. We'll be your moderators for today. One quick word on format. So we're going to go through a series of questions. For each question, we're expecting, for the first one, we'll actually use it kind of as a position statement and hear from all of the panelists. Beyond that, we'll throw out questions. We expect a couple of the panelists will probably jump in to take some positions on the response, and then we'll immediately open up for audience input as well. We have a couple of microphones. Please wait for a microphone because we're recording before you give comments. Any perspective is welcome. There's so much happening in the world of artificially intelligent assistants today that there's a lot of material that we can go through. So let's get started. We'll start with just a quick round of introductions so you know who our panelists are. To your left is Usama Fayyad is our first panelist. His perspective is very broad. He's quick biographical word. Usama, I first met when he was my boss's boss at Yahoo. He led a data management and data science organization that was extremely successful in the company and wound up being quite influential in the way that Yahoo made use of data, and also spawned the Yahoo Research Organization. But in addition to operating as an executive in an industry research setting, he's also spent time in a number of large companies in different verticals, including most recently several years as the chief data officer at Barclays Bank. He's done a number of startups. He's a pioneer in data mining. He's a SIG KDD Innovation Award winner and a Service Award winner, and he's also been involved in the kind of incubation community all around the world. So Usama Fayyad, and to his left is Larry Heck, who is my colleague at Google right now, but before that he spent several years at Microsoft, where he was responsible for the speech programs in the research organization, including the initial creation of what became the Cortana project. Before that, he was at Yahoo. He ran the search research organization for a period of time, and was responsible for all of quality and ranking for Yahoo Search, and before that he was at Nuance, where he was the VP of Research for Nuance's speech recognition. So Larry has spent much of his career understanding dialogue, speech, and how people interact through voice with computers, and so he'll bring that perspective to us. And then Muthu will introduce our other two panelists.
Hi, welcome to the panel. On my left is Deepak Agarwal. I think I met him and we had office next to each other at AT&T, but he was a brilliant statistician. But that was 2 lifetimes away in tech world. Since then, he's been at Yahoo and sort of honed how to think about personalization and recommendation in a significant way. And now he leads AI and machine learning. I guess that's statistics efforts at LinkedIn, and where he brings very good principle thinking to people's work aspirations. Okay. On his left is Bing Liu, who comes from the great AI expertise from his PhD days, and much of his research focus is on sort of nexus of NLP, text-based techniques, machine learning methods, and also applies to something that is very much part of assistant technology. It's about understanding emotions. Okay. He's a terrific scholar and a leader in this KDD area, and is a distinguished professor of University of Illinois Chicago. So we're happy to have everybody on the panel, happy to have everybody in the audience. So we'll get started. Okay. I was told that you should always start from the beginning, so we are starting from the beginning. Okay. It'd be nice to have the panel members comment on sort of What's the current state of AI assist technology in terms of successes, some of the market challenges, and sort of talk a little bit about general progression of next couple of years, a few years of where the technology would be. Okay, we'll start with Summer.
There's an on button. So I guess in this room we'll stand up when we speak. Let's see. So I have been involved in utilizing the artificial intelligence bots, the chat bots for text, and the of course voice recognition bots. Let me start out by saying where I think the most successes I've seen, where it's actually robust and working. My favorite application actually is very mundane, but if you look at browsing your cable TV channels, finding programs, asking it to tune to a particular channel, find when a certain movie is showing, or find stuff on demand, that stuff now is working very well on multiple platforms. And it's very impressive, right? It's a testament to an ability to listen to a show because, by the way, two things are critical here. Very narrow domain, even though it's a rich set of programs. It's an easy search problem underneath it. And keyword spotting and techniques like that work very well there. So the speech-to-text part of it is very robust, and then the text search part of it is very reasonable. So it works really well. The other one that probably a lot of you use are, and maybe some of you hate, but I happen to like them, a lot of the what used to be called IVR that are now sort of more automated bots that can talk to you on the phone, ask some questions, try to respond. And in narrow domains again, very good performance, pretty accurate, can handle, I can tell you from the enterprise side, they can handle 80 to 85% of incoming calls and queries, which is huge because a lot of the companies have to maintain very big call centers, very expensive, training those people, getting them on message, making sure that they don't do stuff when their mood is bad, and all that kind of stuff comes into it. So this is significant, and the stuff there works. Now let me talk about the disappointments. There's been plenty of, well, several I should say, of platforms for chatbots, to support chatbots. I'll share with you a couple of experiences, one with Barclays, and I'll talk a little bit about another one with Blue Kangaroo, which is a startup. So this is at a very large enterprise and a very small startup. Barclays, the team got very excited about these chatbots and said, well, we can probably use them to do customer support. So we started out with the Facebook chatbot. Didn't quite work, didn't generalize. We said, oh, you know what? Facebook bought this company called Wit.ai, which actually provides the infrastructure. So let's use Wit.ai directly. Again, worked for a little while, then very quickly broke down because it doesn't know the domain. Then we said, okay, we need a better one. So we went to API.ai, which is actually later got bought by Google. Again, better, but it didn't survive long. And here's what I will tell you where we ended up as the bank. And this is the team that was doing this was in South Africa, Barclays Africa. They ended up, through this experience, gathering enough training data to actually start building their own processor and their own sort of keyword spotter and their own understanding of the phrases and so forth, which is very disappointing, right? Because this is a failure of what is supposed to be generic web-based APIs that you call and they deliver, right? So that to me has been quite a disappointment. We went through a similar kind of experience with a startup. This was doing bots, AI bots for shopping, mostly on the tech side. And again, same kinds of problems until we had to start building our own, right? So I am, here to say I am disappointed in the publicly available platforms, including the ones from Google nowadays, I guess. But by the way, we've played with we played with the ones from Microsoft, etc. Have not tried the Apple Siri, but a lot of you probably have your own experiences. I don't think Apple has a publicly available API yet. But even if you tried Siri on sort of regular usage, you can see where it's really good in certain couple of domains. And I think the theme to remember, if it's a very narrow domain and the keyword spotting works, which is just statistics, not understanding, it works really, really well. Was there part of this question about the next 5 years, or is that later? I guess we'll keep it at good and bad for now. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not going to start with a lot of controversy because I agree with what Osama's saying. Maybe that's later. I guess in terms of the biggest successes that I see right now is we've, as a community, established the head in terms of those important domains or verticals that people want, and we do a good job in those narrow domains. And the other is the need. If you look here at the interest level, just in this room, but you look across the industry right now in terms of the number of people working on conversational bots, not to mention the bigger companies like Google and Apple and Facebook and Microsoft. There's a definite expression of a belief that it is the era of the personal assistants is here. So there's an expression, I guess, implicit with that of that there's a need for the personal assistants. So those are the two big success stories. And even to get to this point, people have been working on personal assistants for a long, long time. At SRI in the mid '90s, we were trying to build this office assistant, and this Adam Chire, who is the founder of Siri, the startup Siri, was there, and a bunch of us were trying to get everything to work, and speech recognition didn't really work very well at the time. And so Adam, who is in the AI center on the second floor, he spent most of his days down with us in the speech group, just trying to get the speech recognition to work. And then years later, when Apple was just about to buy Siri, I was at Microsoft at the time, and a few of us went down and talked to Siri right before that. And we were at dinner, and I was talking to Adam, and I said, "What's changed?" We were both talking about why now? Why is it that the technology is ready? And we both agree that it wasn't really any particular or single breakthrough in any particular technology. It was more that we had a good enough quality across the board of the technology components that were required to build an assistant. It was sort of like all the boats in the harbor raised enough that we could actually start to build these systems. That was 5 years ago. I still think that we're in this situation where we can build, as Osama said, we can build domain by domain, do a pretty good job of building assistants for them. But in terms of extension and breadth to the torso or the tail, there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of technical challenges, which we'll talk about later. So I guess flipping that to the positive, what I would see is biggest success in 5 years down the road is significant advancements on how third-party companies that want to, like Barclays, that want to build a personal assistant can do that without having to build their own NLU technology, being able to leverage toolkits that are made available so that this building of personal assistants becomes democratized across the board, and that we can start to hook these assistants together to get breadth.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thanks to Andrew and Muthu for organizing an excellent panel, and thanks for the kind introduction. So I got interested in artificial intelligent assistant like 6 months ago. So the vision was to create something we call LISA at LinkedIn Smart Answer. So the goal is for Lisa, if you're a recruiter and you come to the site, Lisa should be able to help you source candidates way more efficiently than what you do today. If you are thinking of a career change, then there should be a career coach that can actually help you decide what should be the next career play you should take. So that was really the vision we had in mind, and we started working on it for 6 months, and I've learned a lot about this field. And again, I agree with what Osama and Larry said. So we started with that vision, but for so far, we realized that the technology is again very good. If you're looking at a very narrow problem, for instance, we have built something internally. This is not publicly available, called the company bot. So if you join a new company, there is a lot you need to learn about the new company, right? And it takes you time before you settle into the company. So can we create an assistant that can help you onboard into the new company? Like, who are the important people you should talk to? What are the articles people in that company are reading? Who should you talk to? Who should you have lunch with? Based on all the information we have over. So in those kind of narrow domains, we see things working really well. The aspiration we had of creating a career coach for all of you, that's still in the works, and that will take more time. We have been trying to use a lot of open platforms like the Facebook and Microsoft bot framework to do things. So what we have realized is these platforms are very nice, right? They have a nice framework for you to put things together and roll it out, but they're still minimalistic in their approach, right? So you still have to build a lot of things yourself. Like, for instance, you have to figure out of course, you all have to know what your problem is. I mean, if you don't know the problem, you're not doing the right thing. But then once you know the problem, what is your state space, and how do you train your models? How do you collect your label data? What kind of NLU model you need to train? So that all of that thing, how do you orchestrate your dialogue? What reinforcement learning technique you should use? This is all something that you have to do yourself today. Right? I know there are a lot of research that's happening, and these things will slowly become more available on these platforms, and then things will become much easier for all of us to be able to build these artificially intelligent assistants in the next 5 years. I believe that's going to happen in the next 5 years. We are going to solve a lot of small, narrow problems, as Osama was talking about, and our lives will become way more efficient. In fact, this will probably, it could be like we will be at an inflection point in 5 years, and artificial intelligent assistants could become as ubiquitous as search was. Like 15 years ago, when search became, really high quality, thanks to all the work at Google, we now don't think about it. It is part and parcel of our daily life. So I believe this is going to happen. And once you have a nice ecosystem and a lot of people are working innovation, the speed of innovation is going to increase, and things that look very difficult today, I think, would progress much faster than what we think. So that was my point of view.
As the last person, I don't really have to say much because everything has been said. So I just want to say a few things. One thing is basically this chatbots really got people interested in natural language processing, and also, create a lot of jobs. And another thing is I show some sort of that trend chart. If you see the natural language processing, it's also going up. So we know, which is a very good thing. For me, I got into this chatbots when I first get iPhone. I really tried the Siri over the years. I've been trying. I never liked it. I never sort of feel this is useful until not the Siri, but later on when I went to my daughter's university dorm, and she has Echo in her dorm, and she was using that all the time. And then I went there. I said, "Oh, this has become useful." And then she said she was using Siri all the time as well. So I think probably we are too old. I guess, yeah, it's true. It's true because my daughter, she said that friends is doing that too. So we probably need to know, the young generation, the new generation, not really young, but the new generation or the even smaller ones. Because for example, my PhD students, he graduated a few years ago, and his children, his son is now 3 years old, 3 and 4. He said the son now think that guy is a part of the family. Yeah, it's seriously. He said this is bad or is it good, or the people get when they start very small, they get confused. Sometimes why don't you take this guy go for dinner or something? Why did this guy does not sleep? like because we have attachment with pets or this kind of thing in the future, especially when you have a moving one, now it's not the moving one. And now you don't know, everybody, for example, everybody was like a mafia king, right? You got a whole assistants following you, that would be interesting. So I think it's a very interesting area. So the negative points, of course, I think that currently the system is to my feeling, I mean, not my children's feeling. I think the technology is still not there yet to some extent, of course, which gives us a lot of opportunity to do lots of research. I'm particularly interested in the two aspects. Of course, my research was being sort of sentiment analysis, opinion mining. Obviously, I'm interested in the emotional things when you get human beings are very emotional, and then you want to talk to something which is very flat, which is very uninteresting. It's a bit boring. Another thing is regarding technology is also, can we make this kind of bots that learn by themselves, not just given the rules, given the patterns, and training the thing, and then leave this thing to just to work. I mean, without learning in the process, which is quite interesting. Another thing I think that contribute to the bad quality of certain bots is I know a little bit of company. I did a little bit of consulting on something else, but not on this thing. I realized some of the company they want a bot. They can't get it, so they just ask the hardware guys, why don't you just go to study the bot to build us one? I mean, in 2 months. I mean, obviously, this guy don't know anything about natural language processing. I mean, how can they build a good bot? I mean, it's very difficult. And another thing is sort of knowledge acquisition, because I'm sure everybody, especially these older guys about artificial intelligence, one of the things is knowledge acquisition. It's very tough. It's very difficult to do. Although you know a lot of stuff, but when you come to actually to tell the bots what kind of pattern should I put in, it's not that easy. So that's why many of my experience has been when I ask a little bit simple thing, yeah. I mean, when you ask one more thing, you don't know what the guy is talking about. Okay, I think let me stop here.
Okay, so that sort of establishes our baseline in terms of 4 perspectives on where we are today. And so we're going to turn now to the future. And let's start out by talking a little bit about what's probably the most basic question about how people will interact with these bots going forward. So there seem to be 2 models that are being discussed pretty frequently. Model 1 says that your bot is your digital gatekeeper. It's your Jeeves, your Carson, your butler to the online world. And if you need to do anything, if you need to plan a trip, or you need to write a check, or you need to learn about a place for dinner, then you'll interact with your butler, who will, on your behalf, contact any other necessary resources and kind of broker your communications with all the additional third-party services. So that's kind of the Jeeves model. On the other hand, there's the other model that says, no, that might have worked for aristocrats in Downton Abbey, but it doesn't work today. What we do instead is we tend to have relationships with all the different service providers. And when I need to think about my vacation, I will go and talk to an individual travel planner, or I may even talk to a specialized agent for a particular service provider. When I need to do financial, I have this person that I talk to about finances. I talk to my tax person about taxes. And so it'll be the same thing with bots. We'll have individual relationships where I'll talk to my TV about one thing. I'll tell my toaster not to make the toast too dark. And so the question for the panel and for the audience is, which of these 2 worlds is likely to happen? Will we predominantly wind up communicating with a single agent that knows us very well and very deeply and can operate on our behalf? Or will we predominantly wind up spreading our attention across a large number of different bots provided by different entities?
So of the 2 models, I guess I'll take a clear position. I guess Andrew's comments that if you have a butler or an assistant, you're aristocracy. So I guess I've been aristocracy since I left Microsoft in 2000, because I've always had an assistant. Actually, after I left Barclays, I now have 2 assistants. So maybe I'm a big believer in look, the world is complex. And actually, from a services perspective, because of the internet, because of what's going on, it's gotten more complex. your ability to even remember, or where do I go to do this and where do I go to do that, is diminishing quickly. If you're working in the real world, in a job where you're so busy with some other higher priorities, an assistant is absolutely essential, right? I mean, when I left Yahoo, actually my assistant quit and left and worked for me for another 5 years. I'm a strong believer in the brokering model because it sort of helps you simplify. I think potentially if the assistants get to be intelligent enough and good enough, and by the way, I'm not very bullish. You know, unlike some people on this table, I don't think it's the next 5 years. I think it's beyond that, because for an assistant to be effective, that assistant must have common sense reasoning. And common sense reasoning, you know, don't believe any of the AI hype you've been hearing. Nobody has even given a little dent against the problem of common sense reasoning, which, by the way, even a small child can do. So we still are very far in the AI world from having solved some of these fundamental problems that are very important. Whether it's deeply understanding intent, modeling emotions, all that kind of stuff that we do naturally is still difficult for machines to emulate. I do think eventually we'll get there, but it's a much longer journey than 5 years. So my belief is, to democratize this, if we get good, we do need that broker. I think we need that broker today. Most people are unable to navigate the complex world today anyway with the information overload. And I think these bots will play a big role by creating that broker that will actually then farm it out to the other sub-brokers and come back with an answer. Google kind of acts like that for me today. Increasingly, I hate to admit it because over time I used to compete against Google, but I think they have won. Because right now, the first thing I go to is that Google search box. Even if I'm looking for somebody else. I mean, today I was searching for people on Twitter. I couldn't find them. I had to go to Google to find them on Twitter. So it's actually pretty good.
Anybody want to take the other side?
So I'm not going to take an entirely other side, but I'll say there are two kinds of bots I can think, assistants. One is goal-oriented tasks. So if I'm doing a goal, if I have a goal in mind, like I have to book my vacation or I have to find a restaurant, then I like the broker model. But then if I'm not feeling well and I need a therapist, then and if I need to do a chit chat with someone, then I don't want to use my broker for doing that. So I want to go to a different bot if that's the case.
You must not have an assistant.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is I think it evolves over time. I think that there is a need, there will always be a need to have a assistant that gets to know you very deeply. And, like you think about a human personal assistant, if you've had an assistant, when you first meet the assistant, they're getting to know you, you're getting to know them. Often you will bring in, let's say it's a third-party service, you will do it together initially, so that there's kind of a three-way. But the assistant that's getting to know you gets to know you by how you're interacting with this third party. And over time, some of those functions that it gets more and more confident that it can do for you, it will take care of for you. And of course, that's a trust relationship over time. So I think, to me, it's the model sort of shifts over a period of time as the system's learning.
I think I have sort of opposite view. I definitely would like to have assistant which basically knows everything about me and that can help me with everything. The problem with that is, how can you guarantee the privacy? I don't know. I don't want some company or whatever to have everything about me. And I would really like to have sort of individual services. At least you guys do not collaborate with each other to connect my dots or things like that. I'm not the bad person. I'm not saying I have something to hide, but many people, I do feel so. I don't really want one company to know everything about me, which is not good. Yeah.
Okay, views from the audience on this question.
Hey, I feel like there could be a solution that consists both views, kind of because we could have a specific purpose bots that then also have a bottler bot that talks to those, and like the bottler bot would understand and know you, but the specific purpose bots would like take care of booking vacation, etc., etc. So it can be a solution that is sort of between the two ends, like sort of on the spectrum.
Right, from the customer point of view, I think that's a digital gateway may appear more attractive because I have a Echo in my home too, and I like to talk to him and make it to do a lot of things for me. So I only need to interact with a single point of contact, right? And but if I have to handle with the different agents, that could be a lot more difficult for me because I need to configure each of these agents and maybe have a different software installed, and I don't like that. So for customer, simplicity is, I think, is key.
So I think I personally feel that in the world, I'm not sure if it's the ideal world, I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but I can certainly imagine that in the future, everyone talks to their own personal assistant bot to ask them to do general things. But in general, when you have issues, then the bot will contact the specialist bot to solve the specific questions that for you. So meaning that it is like a network where you talk to your personal bot, and the bot will find all the specialist bots for you. Because from doing that perspective, actually, every bot can actually do things that they are designed at and are good at, right? So I would think that from my perspective, that might be likely to happen. But a corresponding question, then what do we do, right? So what kind of work do we do?
Probably a good segue to the next question. If you don't mind, we'll keep going for a few minutes. Just want to say that I think that in the previous question, there is a real dichotomy. If you had some assistants which are good at something and that knowledge is not available to the other assistants, then assistants can never get to be as good as we want it to be. I think there's a serious dichotomy here, from technology point of view. Having said that, one of the things I like being family, I have a little daughter who talks to her assistant and says things like, "Would you like some breakfast?" Okay. So as these technologies get rolled out, there's a real question of dependence and relationship with these assistants. And there's some implications, whether they're for workplace or they're for relationship with teens. These assistants can be anything from simply chit-chat things that are harmless to real companions to perhaps even displacing some other things we're able to do. So I'd like to have the panelists sort of weigh in on what are the implications of assistants in particular areas like, say, assistants with teens or in workplace or in workplace environments.
I can comment on that a little bit. So, again, when we all go to work today, I mean, I think we would all agree that the workplace could become way more efficient than what it is, right? A lot of things that we do, even building machine learning models, which all of us do, is not as automated as it should be. So, but again, there are a lot of things that we could do to automate stuff that we do in the workplace, and that's all good, right? Because that's going to add more efficiency to the workforce, and we will all be doing and acquiring skills that are at a much higher cognitive level than we do. So, but when it comes to home, again, there are a lot of tasks that we do today that is very time consuming, and so there is a lot of opportunity there as well to add more efficiency. The new generation, as Bing was talking about, they are kind of growing with these devices, so it's very natural to them, and sometimes we may not be able to relate to them, but I'm also more worried about the societal impact of what this is going to do to us. Like, imagine living in a society where most of these things are happening through automated assistance. So the human component, the interaction that we as human beings have on a day-to-day basis, that is gone suddenly. And so what does that mean to us as a society is something which I always worry about. And how do we deal with that, right? So that are we going to become a society where we don't have empathy for each other? That's not good, right? So what do we do to kind of avoid that? And how should we transition ourselves as a society from the world that we live today to the new world without losing that human component? That's a very big issue.
Deepak, we may not have LinkedIn for people, we may have LinkedIn for assistants. Your job might be all about indexing assistants.
Those are all fake profiles, by the way, so we remove them.
Let's see. I think some of the two concerns that were raised, I guess I'll disagree with a couple of them. Number one, the concern about what does it do to us as humans. I am sure when the automobile became very common, everybody was concerned about what's it going to do to the family, and people will move away, etc. Evolution is evolution. We will change. We will adapt. And the new generation will adapt to the new norms. In terms of the privacy issue that was brought up by Bing first and others, I mean, that's a serious issue. That's a policy issue. It's not a technology issue, right? So to me, I don't have to think about a company knowing everything about me, because I think a model that will work is you will own that bot. You will have to trust that bot. And I'll bring back the analogy, right? I said I have 2 assistants today. I have full trust in the assistant. If I have a shadow of a doubt, that assistant will be fired, right? And I trust the assistant with a lot of confidential information. I mean, when I was at Barclays, my assistant knew the salaries of everybody, MDs, all sorts of people in my organization. Very sensitive information. She saw reviews. She reads my emails. She, replies to half the email incoming to me. So those are, the trust is needed. And you map that to technology. What it means is you should own it. I mean, there's a real case going on now. I don't know if any of you heard about the case involving Echo, where, remember, this device by definition has to be listening all the time in case you call for it. If it's listening all the time, is it recording what it's listening to? So there was I think a fight between a guy and his girlfriend or fiance, and a murder happened. And the police actually went to Amazon and wanted to get potentially the recordings of what was happening in the room at the time of that murder, right? Now, you can think of that as a potentially, reasonable use and maybe a justified intrusion. But think of other stuff, like if this damn thing is listening to you, disagreeing with Trump or disagreeing with the CIA or whatever, it can get very scary. So we do need to solve the policy issues. These are not technology issues, policy issues. It's very, very important. I mean, I've been dealing with data privacy, and now it maps into, sort of these devices taking over your life.
I'm sorry, I need to speak up here. I work for Amazon. I'm not speaking for Amazon officially.
Charles, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. My name is Charles Elka, and I work for Amazon. And I want to stress I'm not speaking for Amazon officially, but I can categorically assert that the Echo device is not recording continuously, and that Amazon is not storing continuously what people are saying in front of the Echo device. That is simply not true.
It's good to know. In case somebody's recording it, I'm glad they listen to you.
Charles, can you guarantee that it will not be true on the long term? I mean, those are the real questions here. I think claimed it's true. Nobody claimed it's true. I said there was definitely a subpoena. Now, hopefully, the answer by Amazon was we can't do it for the right reason.
Yeah, I think I want to pull back a little bit to focus on the teens, for example. Okay, we're now talking about the questions about privacy, questions about sort of emotional dependence and its implications on the society, our lives, plays out a little bit differently when you think about youngsters and teens as opposed to people like me. Okay, so Bing, do you want to say something about this, or Larry? Yeah.
I mean, for teens, obviously they grow up with this technology or with all kind of stuff. Even for myself, for example, I'm doing this review kind of study. I was trying to ask people whether, when you have a good experience, are you going to write the 5-star reviews for the books or something? I mean, when you come to the PhD students, no, they're not going to do it. Older, they're not going to do it. But I asked my daughter and I asked her friends, they will do it. They say, yeah, I'm always on that. I say, I like that stuff. I just read a few lines. I mean, that they got used to that. So another thing I want to mention was basically, I don't know what is this bots, although now they don't really help the children so much in terms of the homework, that kind of stuff. But as time goes by, they might go there. That's going to make money, and it's going to do something. And whether the children's are not going to study that much, and even now for example, now you have this GPS, right? When you're old enough, you drive from Chicago to New York, you have to look at the map. This thing is horrible. And for me, when I went from Chicago to New York, I printed 56 pages of that. From that time was the MapQuest. But now you have this thing, you have no idea what's going on anywhere. You just follow the GPS. I think this is going to be a problem for the children, if this goes wild. They can find anything, and they don't have to do any hard work. You don't learn the skills of doing research or whatever, and they're probably not a great thing. All right.
Yeah, so I have a senior in high school and a senior in college, 2 boys, and talking to them about how they would like to interact with assistants and how they are. A lot of what they do is, of course, there's the social network aspect, but a lot of what they like to do is media, and they like to do group activities. And so my oldest son, we were talking about YouTube, and YouTube gets watched a lot on TV screens. And I was asking him, well, when would you do that? And he said, well, when I have my friends over. If I don't have my friends over, then I'll just watch it on my laptop. So there's implications, I think, with respect to multiple devices and having this seamless interaction with personal assistant that cuts across, not just the box that's sitting in the house, Google Home or Echo, but being able to connect over to the TV and that sort. The other thing is with respect to modality, there's a lot of work that's been done on chit chat kind of interactions, and what I see and what I understand talking to my sons about this is that probably like most people, they don't think of chit chat being separate from doing something, having the system complete a task for them. They just sort of view it as it should be able to have this conversational capability. So this unification of the implication of the technology is that the experience should be seamlessly going back and forth between chit chat and then climbing down into completing a task, then go back up to chit chat, and it shouldn't feel like it's a separate kind of experience.
Okay, so we're sort of looking at these 2 verticals, teens and workplace, just as a way to flesh out what sets of issues arise that are very different than what we think about in a common consumer use case. So thoughts from the audience on things that we're missing with respect to those 2? Anybody want to take a stance and say that this will be great for teens to have a robotic buddy to interact with, or damaging in other ways, or that the workplace view is going to be very different?
Hi, my name's Paul. I work at Microsoft, just for context. I guess one of the panelists brought it up, I think, but one of my main worries is I have small kids, 7, 7, and 5. I guess I kind of worry about how closed-minded they might be in the context of an assistant. I worry about the sense that assistants only know certain things, and if they follow the assistants, then they won't get to have kind of the serendipity of exploring and learning more, which perhaps could be done by another assistant, but I'm curious about that aspect of things.
Deepak, you looked at personalization a lot.
Yeah, so I wanted to, I may not answer your question directly, but I think there have been numerous studies done that show that we learn much better, and we are more creative if we learn in a social setting. right? So that I think is going to be a challenge. Like if there is an assistant that helps you do your homework and do your coursework, and you don't go to school, you don't have to interact with other peers in a social setting, then what does that do to our learning? Like how does it? How do we inculcate creativity, which is kind of all coming from that social interaction? That's something which I really worry about, and that may address some of the issues you're talking about, but maybe in one dimension, not every other dimension that you talked about.
Okay, and one more audience comment here.
Hi, I'm Hung from Google Research, and kind of inspired by all the panel speakers, I have some thoughts related to both the first question and the second question. So I think one thing interesting we can think about is the incentive of the user, if it's one personal bot or one specialized bot assistant for each services. Like if I can feel like my personal assistant knows all of my incentives and objectives, let's say I'm booking a restaurant or travel, do I want to save money, do I want to maximize experience for my family, or do I just want best education for my kids and so on. If I can kind of tell my personal assistant that incentive and I can trust it to kind of carry out on behalf of me perfectly, I might like the one personal assistant model. But if not, maybe I want to be the one who does the brokering and negotiation with the other assistant, which may have different incentive, like to maximize the revenue of each company providing that services. And regarding to kids, I'm not sure if kids are mature enough to realize that there might be different incentives behind different assistants, and therefore some assistant might provide education or entertainment with a hidden agenda, like trying to educate kids in some way to maximize their benefits. So I think these are all interesting questions to think about.
Okay, one last comment on this question, and then we'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, by the way, this is a song Luo from Capital One. About this question, I think that it's unavoidable that this is a digital assistant will get into the education system, schools, camps, and also we need our kids to spend more time with these digital robots like Echoes or other digital assistant. So they can become smart. They will know a lot of things, right? Kids can ask them. But if we want this digital system in the education systems, one key problem is that how we put values in these digital systems, how we let the systems know what is wrong and what is right, right? So what kind of the value systems we want to input into this machine learning and the digital system is a key point for you guys.
Okay, thanks. We're gonna take one small step out into deeper philosophical waters for a second, and then we're gonna come back into some more hardcore technical questions. So our next question is touching on some points that have come up a couple of times about what your assistant should be able to do on your behalf and how much it would be natural to empower the assistant. So I have 4 scenarios here. First scenario says your assistant might respond to somebody else by saying, "I'm sorry, Joe's not available right now." And that seems pretty reasonable. One step further, your assistant might come back to you and say, "Oh, you asked me to book a show? I booked you the 7:30 show. It turned out that was the best time available." So this is now making a little bit of a decision about which one in particular to book based on some higher level guidance. The third one says, "I found a great date for you this Saturday night, so dress nicely." So now we're moving into something where sort of imagine this assistant is actually kind of trying to draw some conclusion that might be a reasonable thing to do. And for my 4th example, just to go extreme, by the way, I bought you a house. So, so the question is, what can we say about what's realistic for models for how to cede power to your assistant to operate on your behalf?
I think that, and there's a strong technical implication here. It's a hard problem, but I think that the answer to that is it should be up to the end user how they want the assistant to operate at those different levels. Whether it's I'm taking a message on your voicemail all the way to buying a house for you. But to have, if you look at the current state of the products that are out there, none of them really are very configurable by the end user, or at least maybe slightly configurable, or teachable. So the end user ought to be able to, if they want to, sit down and teach the system certain preferences, but also be able to teach the assistant how they speak, their language. The assistants should be very transparent to how it's coming up with these decisions, so that the user is able to understand what the perspective of the assistant is, and then be able to, through that transparency, be able to adjust and correct and refine, and all of that through dialogue. Being able to, there's some early examples of being able to do that by power users, where they can go on and program up, like IFTTT kinds of capabilities. That's something that's important to that particular person, but it's still in the earliest stages. And so I think if to me, the answer is that we empower the end user. We make it very easy for the end user, but it's very complex technically to do that. To just have a conversation with the assistant, and then have it configured so that it operates on all those different dimensions how you want it to.
Okay. Any takers from the audience on this question?
I think in the future we have to live in the life that you actually live with your assistant, which is part of you, or maybe a ghost of you, because he actually, there's a couple of different things, like we all want to be, we grow up with our own personality. We don't want to be individual uniqueness. And, with assistant and build up based on machine learning algorithm doing similar prediction, we might in the future look very similar, right? And so how, and another question also is, if I have assistant, you have assistant, so if your son play with his friend, is the assistants of your son also play with the assistants of your son's friend? So I think in the future, we actually facing a very interesting thing, and it will going to be true, and maybe happen very soon. So we have to prepare us in the future how to think. We will leave a group of something that virtually exists in the machine, but maybe physically actually attached with you with emotion. Yes.
Yeah, I might be comfortable with my assistant buying me a house, but I'm not comfortable with Andrew's assistant buying me a house.
As long as they play nicely together. Okay, so let's return to shore briefly and talk about the technological underpinnings of these kind of assistants. We're not limiting ourselves to dialogue. There's been a lot of interesting discussion to suggest that non-dialogue based assistance in many settings is clearly the right thing. But across the board, the next question is, what are the key technical holes in what capabilities we have today that will need to be addressed before some of these things that we've touched on in addressing some of the social implications become possible? And from conversations with the panelists earlier, I'd particularly like to hear from Deepak on some of the questions around elicitation, from Larry on some of the open questions in multi-round dialogue, and then any other directions the panelists and the audience would like to take this one.
Yeah, so one of the technical challenges, I believe, which is very important for us to solve is in a multi-turn dialogue system is information elicitation. So I've been working on recommender systems and search for a long time. So I feel those systems solve the easy problem. Like, you ask a question and you get an answer in one shot. For recommender, you just come and based on your implicit interest, you provide but oftentimes you don't get the right answer. Like, for instance, if you're doing research to buy a house, the assistant is not going to understand exactly what you need right on the first turn, right? So how do you efficiently elicit information from the assistant? How do you formulate the right set of questions so that you can reach the right answer with very few turns as possible. That's actually very important. And moreover, the interaction has to be more humane-like, right? So if it is only machine-like, then you're not going to be very forgiving, right? These are all statistical systems, right? So every statistical system is going to make some errors. And so the key here is to make the conversation a bit more human-like so that you are more forgiving and you continue the conversation. So those things I believe are very important technical challenges. The other things of memorization and language understanding, if you set up your state space and all that stuff properly, I think techniques like memory networks and other things, they are already showing a lot of promise. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I believe that statistical learning problem would be easier to solve than the elicitation problem.
Yeah, I don't think that there will be a single assistant from a single company that will suffice to be able to cover the breadth of needs for skills or knowledge of users. And so and I think part of the reason for that is because, for example, like in the workplace, companies are not necessarily they're probably not going to want to be able to, or not going to want to, or be able to share the kind of data that would be required to build, these smart assistants, let's say to Google, and it's this, company. So there's data privacy issues or proprietary information, a bunch of reasons like that. And the other reason is just, of course, scale. So that's one of the technical problems, or at least there's implication for technical problems there. And the other is just lack, even within domain, within vertical, like Osama's example with Barclays, is just the lack of training data. And when I say training data, I really am not so much talking about just the language understanding piece, but training data of full dialogues. How does the system learn how to actually have a multi-turn dialogue interaction? Well, you have to have data of multi-turn dialogue interactions, not just single turn. And that kind of data that's annotated at the level that the current technology requires is very expensive to get and hard to get lots of data. But I think there's a couple product trends, approaches that are happening now, and I think that it challenges us as a community with a bunch of research problems. One is to combat this issue of scale. Companies are putting a lot of emphasis right now on building up ecosystems for third parties, building tools so that third parties can actually create their own bot and then attach it into, let's say, the Google Assistant. Like Alexa, I think it has more than 10,000 skills that they've built out, which means there's 10,000 of these separate bots that are in the ecosystem. I think that's really being pushed right now. Of course, the technical challenge there is, it's really easy to bring up a bot for one of these domains to a certain level. But and you look at the tools that are out there right now, most of them will get you to a base level of understanding quickly. But to get to the level of quality that most of these third parties want is very difficult. I really don't think any of the toolkits that are out there right now suffice. And so as a result, companies end up trying to throw away the toolkit and they have to build their own from scratch. And so that's it's really hard technical problem for us to solve, which is how do you democratize the construction of high quality, not just bots, but high quality assistants. And then assuming we can do that and we solve that problem, then there's this interoperability between these bots, this lingua franca that has to emerge if we're going to want to share knowledge back and forth between each of these different assistants. How do we do that? Is it standards based that we try to enforce? I don't think so. Actually, I think that we can only go so far with standards because companies just are not going to. We've tried this, and I've been involved with this in multiple companies, and it's difficult to get third parties to adhere to low-level technical standards. And so there are some levels of standards, but it's got to be relatively high. And of course, the reason for that is to share knowledge, share information, and that leads to another technical problem, which is this transfer learning adaptation, which is if you have an assistant and then it's a sort of a combination of many third-party bots, can each of them benefit each other? can, in other words, when let's say I have an assistant that already knows how to book a flight with British Airways and American Airlines and maybe 3 others, and then Southwest Airlines comes along and says, "Hey, we want to build, a bot." We ought to be able to greatly reduce the amount of training data that they required for Southwest Airlines because the system it's sort of collectively learned. But there's a lot of technical challenges on how to do that and retain the proprietary information of the third parties.
There's lots of great research questions here. The whole algebra for kind of how to combine all these agents. But I want to hear sort of a university perspective on some of the research challenges here.
Basically, I'm basically in the 2 communities. One is data mining, and another one is natural language processing because I've been doing this sentiment analysis. Recently, I've been thinking also about these bots. I think if you're just doing this machine learning, keep training whatever algorithm you're using, I don't think you're going to get it, right? For example, when I say certain things, why do I say it, right? And also, why do I ask you a question? What is the information gap? What is my curiosity? Those kind of things. I think we need to probably have to study those kind of things a little bit more in order to understand this conversation and also to understand sort of what kind of thing you should say. What is the intention of this person who say this type of stuff? And then you can get to get the answer this person and ask this person additional questions based on your knowledge. I think this part, I believe we need to work with linguists and also probably cognitive scientists to have a better understanding of this thing. Another part, of course, is in terms of computer science. I think most of these bots don't have enough knowledge, and somehow can we give these bots some kind of knowledge? I think it's possible. We're doing some kind of research related to that. As I just mentioned, knowledge acquisition. If you want to build bots, you couldn't tell the bots the stuff you know. It's very difficult to tell. And how do we solve that problem? Even we don't talk about the transfer learning or whatever, just continuous get the bot to learn itself. That's a problem. How do you get this knowledge to the bots? I mean, many of this stuff is context dependent. It's not something you have built something that everybody can use it. It's not that simple. We have been trying something. It's not easy. It's not easy. All right.
Okay, I see a comment So I just wanted to bring one issue which I think is particularly relevant for this discussion in the data mining community. And my key word for that is serendipity. So we may have fantastic recommender systems that are based on machine learning, sophisticated similarity measures, and so on. And they're very useful to recommend a book. But I still find it great fun to walk into a bookstore and walk around, and there's often a book that no recommender system would recommend to me that I find interesting. And I think this is the interesting, rich part of human life that we have to keep in mind and somehow preserve it with, I don't think there's a technological solution for that at all. So I'd like to hear some comments.
I think Charles can build something for you, Nico. It will keep sending you books until you find something interesting.
Marco Grobnik. So one comment to this technological things, right? So what Echo and Google Home and so on brought, right? So remove lots of friction in communication with relatively complex systems. Because of speech recognition and so on. But still, right, the channel really got very narrow. So the channel is really text and no visual, nothing, really text. And this is one of the weakest parts of AI, text understanding. Basically, we cannot do it, right? So we count words, we find patterns, engrams, and that's it pretty much. Maybe sentiment, okay, here and there, right, if it works. Now, this is one part. So I expect in next years, based on what I see, where the funding goes, right, that this text understanding will get much better, let's say in maybe 5 years' time, right? Once text understanding, and these are problems like paraphrasing, for instance. So the same thing can be said in so many different ways, right? We cannot do it at the moment. Once this will be solved, at least to a certain degree, then this narrow channel will get way more useful. Yeah? this is one part of it. And then you mentioned, I think, lingua franca, right? So this lingua franca effectively is knowledge, right? So we can call it personal knowledge graph, maybe. Something which is accumulated during, let's say, days, weeks, years, and so on. Right? And so this mapping from, well, speech, words, texts, right, into this personal knowledge graph and a bit of reasoning on the top, right? So this probably is way more complete chain, and we are just on the beginning of it. Right? And also this many 10,000 skills, or how many we have, right? They probably will communicate with this personal knowledge graph. So I can imagine that this will be way to go. At the moment, these are just isolated apps, pretty much, nothing more, right? To remove, just my point really is to remove further friction out of the system, right? So this text understanding probably is something which will bring a little bit more revolution in the whole thing.
So you talk about the text understanding, and then you say, I mean, people just use text, and actually not true anymore, because in the natural language processing community and also the CVPR community, they're doing both text and the images. So the caption, of course, that's one, but there are also more sophisticated stuff. And now there are also people doing three modalities. You have a speech, you have the pictures, and also you have the text. So that's a very interesting direction to go. I think if we don't go that direction, I think we're not going to make it for just text it alone. Yeah.
Other comments, missing technologies.
Yeah, I have just a quick question. So you were just saying that the feature set or the training set's pretty small for this. How is that possible? Like, we have all of the internet digitized, like every book. We have text, we have chats. So how is it lacking?
Yeah, most of, like, we look at the logs. I'm at Google, so we look at the logs, and most of the logs are of the nature of search query and results, and maybe a click. But in terms of natural language dialogue conversations with multiple turns, that is something that we could model. So we can certainly sort of infer sessions, based on search sessions, in terms of vast quantities of data, but it's not necessarily the model of how I think we want to build conversational interactions, because it's artificial, right? It's you're actually just with a keyboard and mouse and clicking. Actually having lots of data that's not just chit chat kind of data, but goal oriented data where you're trying to complete tasks, where it's conversational and something that we're trying to learn from at that level that's what a part I'm saying is relatively narrow.
So you cannot train from dialogues in Shakespeare. Aren't people? I mean, the interactions in call centers are usually around that. So you don't have access to logs of call center interactions. Is that the problem? I mean, I would imagine companies would be willing to share those with Google.
Yeah, I guess it's an order of degree, right? That breadth of data, most of those data sets are pretty narrow for the specific task. And I used to work on that at Nuance. And we learned a lot from that. We were building directory assistance systems, then we started building call routing, and but they all had this characteristic, which was, okay, this is American Airlines or Barclays, which was one of our clients, and so you have this data that's a very narrow. But the data I was referring to would be very broad domain, web search style data and multi-turn conversational. Yeah.
Do you want to? Okay. Yeah. So. Basically, this big data saying, I mean, you can say that the data is a lot, but when you come to the specific stuff you want to do, actually data is very, very small. For example, you want to build bots, to sort of chatbots like Microsoft's Shell Ice. I mean, you have a huge amount of data to do the training, but when you talk about that specific stuff you want to talk about, I don't believe they have lots of data to train. So that's why, I mean, every time I play with that thing quite frequently, because sometimes for fun, you whether I'm making fun of that thing or that thing is making fun of me, I have no idea, but it's quite interesting. You realize that. You see, this guy, yeah, he's talking about something sort of related to what I'm saying, but it's not exactly. So I think there's sort of still a problem with that training data, and I don't know whether the training data is a solution, but at least there's a big data, but it's also small data.
Slack can help.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yes.
So one thing that if you look at the larger companies that are building these kinds of systems, because of the lack of this multi-turn dialogue data, the result is that a lot of the systems that you're interacting with today are largely rule-based and handcrafted in terms of the multi-turn dialogue. The introduction of data is happening, machine learned models is happening more at the language understanding or text understanding, but the how do you actually model a conversation is still a lot of handcrafting.
So I think this is again a huge I think the cold start problem is in my experience, based on working on it for the last 6 months, when you just are building a system, you have a huge cold start problem, right? You're not seeing how users interact with the system. What is the system getting wrong? What is the system getting right? And often users get frustrated and then abandon the system. They don't build the trust in the system. So if you can cross that cold start hurdle and start getting a lot of data, then you get better and you improve over time. But the cold start problem is really the hard problem in this sense.
So somebody has something to add to this?
I just general comment about the natural language processing, and this is I like to call it text or speech processing rather than natural language, because to your point, all of our algorithms today are very simplistic in their approach and fundamentally statistical pattern recognition. However, I think with training data, you can take them extremely far. A lot of the issues people brought up as objectionable or, well, I can't understand your intent from that. Well, all I have to do is refer you to any search engine like Google that will basically infer your intent very quickly. They will guess very quickly whether you're trying to find a flight or shop for something or just want to learn about something and direct you to the right place. So I think there's a heck of a lot of intent inference. I mean, we built a whole advertising targeting business based on that. It works. So I do think it will take us a long time to crack the natural language understanding and reasoning problems. I think in parallel, the approach of statistical learning and leveraging a lot of training data will take us very far towards solutions that work but don't emulate how humans do it. Much like chess playing or any of that other stuff.
Great. This is we love this conversation here, and Andrew and I realized that we can more or less assume, given all the research talent here and given all the technology talent here, that you will solve the research problems, you'll solve the technology problems. And we could sort of look at a little bit about, if we could do all this, what role should assistants play? Okay. Now we talked about roles, assistants being something like servants. You tell them a task, they do it. Okay. Fire my secretary is a good task for Rusamba. Okay. Now, or we could have something like a little bit more like friends. We talked about how you can get attached to assistant as just a friend or a family member and so on. Okay. And then we sort of graduate a little bit more towards discussion about personality of assistants. You can imagine the assistant having an id, an ego, an alter ego. It could be your id, it could be your ego, it could be your alter ego. You can imagine your assistant telling you that, look, my id tells me that you should eat your donuts. Okay, so there's no reason why assistants cannot be just pleasure-seeking aspects of your personality. Okay? And you could imagine assistants being mentors, therapists. We have lots of interesting research on assistants for sort of help with weight loss, help with overcoming substance abuse, and so on. And these assistants are very careful. You can't, somebody who's sort of struggling with a diet program, you don't want an assistant to say, no, you must not eat that donut. You really want to say, well, if you have a donut today, maybe tomorrow you can do a little bit extra workout. So you want the assistant to be a little bit more gentler, more about behavioral, and you can imagine visualize the world of that kind of role. And we sort of went forward and said, well, you know what? The assistant can in fact be a god. It can be a deity, a divine thing, right? So that has a superhuman responsibility for your human fortunes, right? You can imagine an assistant telling you something that you don't think you should do, but you believe there's a larger design that makes you do it. You can imagine an assistant that can punish you, okay, or if you believe in punishment. Okay. So we were curious to see sort of how does a panel sort of think about the various roles that assistants can play beyond merely the task filling roles that got us started on the path.
Okay, so just to recap, assistant as servant, assistant as friend, assistant as mentor or therapist, assistant taking a psychological role reflecting part of you, or assistant as sort of neo-deity. Where do people stand on what are the right metaphors to think about here? And either what you think would be the right outcome or what you think would be the likely outcome, either from the panel or from the audience if people want to jump in. Yeah.
Hello, Zara Ahmadian from Boeing. I would like to bring attention to the issue of mental health. It's one of the cases, it impacts people from different age groups. When it comes to teenagers, they struggle with peer pressure, feeling of being judged, a feeling of loneliness, and sometimes it becomes very difficult for them to communicate with another human being about what they are going through. And having an assistant with whom they already have a relationship, and then maybe you can have plug and play sort of, you attach these psychological assistant to the existing assistant that the user had, and now can assist them in help them express themselves, gain some awareness around what they are feeling, and perhaps follow some treatment or start changing their behavior or what they're feeling, or follow certain treatments. I think that could have a tremendous impact on the way we treat those scenarios right now.
Yeah, hi. So my comment on this topic is, it would seem to me that an assistant's incentives should be very clear. And sometimes you might have an assistant that's taking a certain action. You kind of want to know why. I think someone alluded to that earlier. But as a personal assistant, I would like my incentives to be the primary motivation. And that gets into how do we collect feedback? And just because an assistant recommended something and it was a wrong thing, and I only found that out outside the band, how does that all get blended in? So whatever path we choose, whether it's a deity or whatever, it should be very clear. And people should be aware of this thing, and maybe their own personal thing should be clearly specified to the assistant.
Other comments? Yeah.
I guess I'll just kind of add that I'm kind of skeptical about any kind of benefit that this technology would bring to humanity. It just seems to me that it's going to make us lazier, dumber, and just outright more boring. And I know people always bring up the car example, but for every car example, there's always there's another nuclear weapons example, where yeah, we knew about that technology, and now arguably we'd regret having it.
Andrew. Well, we're thinking about AI assistants for animals, so this might be a planetary way to deal with this. And there's one more comment.
So, another maybe potential role is assistant as kind of confidant. It links to what you were saying over here about intentions and trying to share your intentions. But if you have an assistant as a confidant, then there are some certain obligations that come with that, which perhaps require learning to be distributed and data to be held more locally, especially when it's very sensitive about long-term intentions and deeply held thoughts and feelings.
Any responses from the panel?
So again, this is just an example. So how many of you have used Stitch Fix, right? So I mean, that's a good example of a personal stylist. It's almost like, it kind of sends you clothes and it makes you dress better, right? So you can think of your hairstylist doing the same thing. So there are already examples of it's not a deity, but, it's kind of understanding your behavioral attributes and helping you become better.
More mentor coach.
More mentor coach,
Life coach was an example that Andrew was talking about.
And the career coach example I was talking about, I mean, we are not done with that, but imagine if you can have an assistant who can be your career coach, who can look at all other people's career trajectories, and say, oh, well, looks like this is the best transition for you.
Deepak, I'm not sure you should be talking about products in life.
So, look.
I have a little bit of experience. We're trying to do a project which is health coach. So health coach, basically the person, the sort of specialist that will give you instruction, ask you to walk 20 steps or 200 steps or whatever, saying that. I mean, I was interested because I said, I want to lose some weight. I want to get this thing to help me. The guy sent me too many messages. I mean, you didn't work today or something. You did not do something. And then I switched this thing off. I think I can't be bothered. It's too intrusive. It's really too intrusive. So I still think it probably will be better to be a sort of slave, and really listen to you. Don't give me instructions, say I didn't do this, I didn't do that, which is not. But I think all the options, what Andrew just said, all those options, I think they're going to happen. I mean, somebody might be using it. If somebody is not using it, slowly they will be improved, and there'll be researchers always looking for a problem to solve. So don't worry, all these things will happen. Although you don't like it.
Look, I think whether assistants are useful or not, I think is not a debate, and I'm not too worried about what happens to humanity if they got good assistants. I think the trick is to have a good assistant as opposed to one that's too verbose or too repetitive or too boring. Like I said in the beginning, I rely a lot on my assistant, and the relationship gets to be strange, and it muddles a lot of these. It crosses these boundaries because definitely her job is to make me efficient and sometimes happy. Her job is sometimes to intervene. Like I would tell her, book me on this flight, red-eye flight to here, put me up there, set up these meetings, and she'll actually not do that because she'll say, I decided this is bad for your health. You're not going to do a red-eye. You're going to check in the night before, and she insists on it, and in the end, turns out to be right. So that part is good, and I actually have a personal appeal for Deepak, for God's sake. Turn off the congratulations on your new job at LinkedIn, because it's almost going to make me quit all of LinkedIn. Every time, like I added here, I was the chair of panels, and I get like thousands of congratulations on your new job. So, a great example of a very dumb assistant.
Okay, that had a nice personal touch to it. So we had a comment over here about how can you back to the assistant and how can you kind of tell it when it's not behaving correctly. So switching to a slightly more technical question, generally we believe that you can only optimize the things that you know how to measure. And so developing a metric for the performance of an assistant seems really important. So we would like to have a clean metric. It might be that depending on the role that you have in mind for the assistant, the metric for a slave may be different than the metric for a friend. But what metric is appropriate? And how do you do A/B testing of these metrics? How do you measure the performance of an assistant? So that's the question.
Yeah, I think right now, because the technology is relatively static, it's not configurable by the end user, like I was talking about earlier, and what the gentleman referred to as this transparency of the assistant, so that you know why it's making decisions. Because of that, the metrics are relatively simple. They're very similar to search. Search generally is impersonal. And so these metrics are, I don't really see much of a difference in the long term between search and personal assistant. I think there's a convergence related to, making our lives boring. I don't think anybody would think search engines has made our life boring. I think it's opened up. It's just a question of precision. And, we expect that the assistant has more precision when we ask it to get an answer to a question. We don't want 10 blue links, we want the answer. Or we want to complete a task, not have a list of different things that we could do or force us to browse through. So it's more of a continuum. And the implication for measuring the performance of that is, it's going to follow something similar to what we're doing in search. There's relevance, and then there's or precision recall, and sort of this trade-off between this precision recall and you know and efficiency, how quickly it gets something done. However, if we can develop technology, which I think we need to, critically important, where the end user gets to is in control. They decide what role their personal assistant's going to play. They decide, you know, how well it knows them. It knows the user decides what kind of language it wants to use and expressions it wants to use, and is able to teach the assistant. Then the measure, I think, ultimately is at the end user perspective is, you know, how much utility is this personal assistant giving the end user? So this macroscopic, you know, measures that we would do with current technology about, well, you know, 87% of, you know, the sample of data worked is not very appropriate. It's more of given a single individual and trace how successful they've been for a month without any major issues or system failures for that one individual, and then do that across all individuals. So the metrics becomes much more complicated and much more at the individual level, I think, is where we have to go.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Larry. So Larry was mostly talking about the online metrics when you are measuring, but I believe for research purposes, it's also important to have something like a UCI or WINE thing where you can evaluate things offline. So that work, there have been some preliminary work done by scientists at Facebook, and you know they have already released some data to evaluate multi-turn dialogues in an offline way. So I think that's also very important. And you know, the one other comment is like even for search and recommender problem, when you're evaluating a long-term impact of a algorithm to user behavior, it's extremely hard. Like you cannot make everyone happy. So for instance, you know, if you roll out a particular algorithm, you know, you can improve the performance by a certain percentage point, but then you'll always maybe deteriorate experience for some user, right? So how do you achieve that balance? That's always a constant struggle for all algorithms. So, and this won't be any different. It would be the same.
So we're moving towards closing for the panel. So what we'd like to do is take one more round of audience feedback across the board, questions, comments, responses to any of the earlier questions, and then we'll do one last summary from each of the panelists. It's like we have a comment over there.
This is Amir from American Airlines. I have actually two questions. You talk about regulation a little bit. I would like to know, to hear your comments about regulation. Specifically, Elon Musk talked about regulation in AI. And I'm talking about general AI, not personal assistant. And the second question is more about the future of the general AI. Should people be afraid in the sense that the job's going to be replaced? They have to adapt to the new situation. Thank you.
Look, the worry about jobs being replaced as we automate a lot of stuff, to me is, I don't worry about it too much, because people had this worry when farming started experiencing technological change and disruption. It happened when the Industrial Revolution happened. It happened in mining. It happened in all sorts of areas. The statistics say, though, somehow, despite all of this automation, despite the fact that a bulldozer can do the job of 100 diggers, human, somehow the planet has managed to support jobs for 7 billion people plus now. We were maybe 1 billion less than 100 years ago. And unemployment rate is lower than ever, and sort of the standard of living as measured by several metrics is higher than ever. So I think the fear that technology replaces humans, I think what happens is technology will replace humans in areas where there's economic drivers for it, and typically that results in the creation of many higher valued economic activities that will keep the next generation, occupied. Now, maybe that's a blind trust or anything, but it seems to have happened throughout history. In terms of general AI, look, I think the rate of progress. So first of all, we are going through another hype cycle for AI. I lived through one in the my early PhD days as a student. I think now we're going through another one. And really, honestly, if I stand up and you ask me what has happened since then in AI, my answer is very, very little. A lot happened in a lot of data being available, training data, and some learning algorithms. Most learning algorithms, by the way, are very simple. And that has enabled a lot of good stuff. So here's what I would say about general AI. I think we will solve the problem over a very long term. But I do think where humans seem to focus and solve problems in a very dramatic and disruptive way is when there's an economic model behind it. So there's an economic model that says we need to produce textiles and complicated patterns in textiles and all of that at scale. And humanity, by the way, roboticized that space, 40, 50 years ago, more than that even, at an amazing scale, right? Because there was an economic model. I don't think there's an economic model that says produce for me a general AI. Therefore, I think progress will happen, but at a much, much, much slower pace. So I'm not worried. I probably, for my life and my kids' life, I don't think we'll be replacing humans with AI. Maybe long-term machines will replace us all, but in the long term, our star will fade and the whole solar system will disappear.
I think there's also hope that this AI assistants will need human assistants, so we might have jobs. Okay.
Yeah, so I want to comment more on the job side. So again, I agree with Sama that in the long term, human race is resilient, and we didn't have a profession called extreme yoga back in the 1900s, right? Now we have. So we didn't have search engine optimization like 15 years ago. Now that's a well-known discipline. So eventually we will have, but I think we have to approach it in a thoughtful way, right? Because this is definitely, there are 3% of our population today provide for their families by driving a truck, right? And suddenly those jobs are gone and they'll get displaced, and asking someone who has never coded in their life to suddenly learn coding is not very easy. We also have to transform our education system, right? So we have to start making sure that the next generation is going to be well equipped with the skills they need to have a job in the future, in the future world that we are going towards. So I would not call it regulation, but I think there have to be some strong policies that we all have to, that a government has to kind of adopt to kind of prepare us to get as much advantage as possible from this new AI age.
I have a different opinion. I think in the past, all this sort of industrial revolutions, all of them just basically replaced the physical jobs. None of them have replaced any of our intellectual jobs, right? But now the problem is that we are getting to the points that are going to replace us. Those people who need some sort of human skills, whatever service skills, you're not needed. You're not needed. I mean, we guys here, we probably don't have to worry. We still have a job. But many people, many years later, it's very possible the service job will be gone. Definitely will be gone. For example, this kind of assistant, then who need the secretaries anymore? Right? And the lots of call centers, I mean, there's no need to have people. So that's a problem. I worry that will happen.
We don't need researchers anymore.
No, we still.
Hi. So I have a technology question.
I'm going to quote you on that one.
I have a two-parter technology question. So the first part is about a decade and a half ago, there was a lot of work on semantic web and followed on to things like Sparkle and so on. And I'm curious, do you guys in practice utilize any of that work, like any of the reasoners or anything like that? The second part is even further back in time, there was this whole expert system thing that happened before my time in the first AI heyday. I'm curious if you guys use any of those things or ideas from that time, like the rule-based stuff, because these days there's just all this push towards deep learning, and people are staying away from rule-based systems because they don't scale. So do you have any insight into are rule-based systems still being worked on the industry side?
Yeah. So the question about Sparkle, yeah, definitely. If you use Google question answering, if you ask it a question, you get an answer. A lot of the back end is relying on an internal version. It's not exactly Sparkle, but something similar. And it's a querying language across a knowledge graph. But of course, the knowledge graph, or I don't know how widely known this is, but even as big as our knowledge graph, it still only covers maybe 10% of the kinds of question-answer interactions we get. So, we have other technologies that's relying more on parsing results from the search engine and pulling answers out, this sort of thing. But yeah, definitely, query languages into knowledge graphs is definitely, I would view it mainstream right now for question answering. And then with respect to rules and the role of rules, absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, even at the level of dialogue right now, just basic control, basic policies of a dialogue engine. Most of the personal assistants that you're interacting with today use rule-based, handcrafted policies. Not to mention the higher levels of inference and reasoning that we're barely getting into. And so as I've seen, my origins was in speech recognition, and I started working on speech recognition in the mid '80s. And not that long before then, there were rule-based systems in the '70s for speech recognition, and there was this transformation over to more and more machine-learned models. And if you think about speech recognition or acoustic modeling and language modeling, and then think about natural language understanding, and then the dialogue modeling, and then inference reasoning, and as we keep going up in over time, we start taking on more of the higher level reasoning, rules and hand-coded knowledge tends to start. That's how we start out at these higher levels, and then as we get better and better models, and we get people, we get data, and then we start, training. So I think it's going to keep progressing up. It'll always be and the other thing I would say is that, a lot of even at the lower level, even the natural language processing, there's still rules and grammars that are being used in sort of a hybrid mode with machine learning. Just because, it's really easy to write some rules and grammars that can do pretty well to get you bootstrapped. So I think there's always be a role.
So we'll take one last comment from the audience and then move into the closing.
Yeah, hi. As someone who grew up in research quite a bit, I felt that a lot of the progress that we made in the past came from benchmarking of data sets that we could sort of compare our results on, right? The UCI ML was fantastic way back, and these days ImageNet is really good for seeing how much progress deep learning is making. Maybe some of our conversation could be a lot more focused if we all agreed on, here are some referential public data sets on which we expect conversational assistants to do a good job. And I think these days, these sorts of data sets exist, but it's pretty much siloed in many different companies. And maybe we could all make some effort to come up with some referential data sets, so at least as a field, we could make progress faster.
Yeah. Google, we want to hear all those chats.
Okay, last comment.
Thank you. So one area which we didn't touch upon was impact of personal assistance on the supply-demand chain. Like if right now we do demand forecasting, imagine if everyone's assistant knew what they want, if they want to book a flight, and then could give the providers and suppliers, instead of forecast, factual information about what the demand is. What would it look like? How would we provide services, and what are the consequences of that? I want to hear if you have any thoughts on that. How would it impact the industry?
Sort of connects to VCs and ecosystems and new models, and I don't know. Any take on this?
I think you could do this without assistance.
Well, I think the idea, I don't know if you want to say, but I think the idea is that assistant could skew this demand. By being a careful assistant, you could make sure that you always suggest American Airlines at the right times. Yeah. I think there's a game theory aspect to here.
So I saw there were a few more hands going up. We'll kind of moving to closing now. The panelists are here. We also have a coffee break afterwards. Please feel free to come up and continue the conversation. But just as a way of closing things out and sort of summarizing the discussion and the perspectives, the final question for the panelists is, could you take a stance on what you see as kind of the one technology that you'd really like to see over the next however many years, and one technological outcome that you're most sort of afraid of seeing?
I'll just summarize kind of some of the comments I've made, but I've already said this. And in terms of my hope for assistance, it follows, at least the first part of this follows very much like the evolution of search, which is the assistant should always be helpful, or at least partially helpful. It should always save me time. It should not be where you talk to the assistant and says, I don't know how to answer that, I'm still learning, right? Search didn't take off until there was a little box and people were confident that any time that they type something in that little box, they're going to get something back that helps them, saves them some time. Maybe it doesn't give the most relevant result, but it's the fifth one down, and it saves them time. So I think that's one thing that I'm hoping will happen with the assistant is these assistants, the development of them is treated more like and held to the standard of search in that sense. But since it's a personal assistant, it should always be learning to be more helpful specifically to you. And you ought to be in control, the end user ought to be in control of actually teaching these assistants so that my assistant may be very different than yours ultimately as I use it. Now, and of course, a lot of that's I think gonna happen because of the democratization of this kind of development tools, both for like the end user, but also third parties. My biggest fear is, Osama alluded to I also remember, the AI winter in the 80s and all of the hype of expert systems and symbolic AI of that time. And those of us that were working in machine learning at that time, we're viewed as not doing AI and very separate. I still have that, although that's not a difference. Now, I think people are equating AI and machine learning together. I still have that concern of overhype. My concern is, winter is coming. So the AI assistant winter, that's my fear.
Yeah. So let me, in summary, I actually think the future for artificially intelligent assistants is very bright. Just adding voice to text has been a huge advance, I think. Now imagine what happens if you add gesture recognition, images, all sorts of other context variables. I think it will only get better. I do think, though, like I said before, it's going to take a while. This is really an extension of the search engine today. So to me, I already see a lot of the things you desire from an assistant happening slowly as search engines become better, and very good at redirecting you to the right place, right? Google will redirect you to a travel agent and will redirect you to other specialized engines, at the right time. And sometimes they don't do that, and it's bad. I also think while the progress will be slow, the developments will accelerate. So because of the availability of data, because of the data collection that's happening, because of the big data technology that's out there, and because it's now possible to start sharing the appropriate data sets with the appropriate kind of arrangements. That's going to be the thing that's going to drive the knee in the curve in this technology and will sort of get us to the next level, if you will. So on that front, I'm very bullish, but I think this is like every other exponential curve. It really looks very, very boring, and it's going to look like not much is happening for a while until suddenly the knee comes, and then it's like a whole other world, which actually we saw that happen in search. We saw that happen in a lot of other technologies. It's going to take a while. I hope I live long enough to sort of see the fruits of that, and even better, hopefully to be functional enough to contribute to the research in it. I will categorically say I am not scared about anything in this area. Go forth and research the heck out of it.
Yeah, so I agree with what Larry and Osama said. So I think the area looks very promising, and I hope all the technology that we're talking about comes to fruition in the next few years, and this becomes a part and parcel of our daily lives and makes us more efficient. If we succeed, then I'm worried about the impact of this to us as a society. So I hope we use it wisely. We don't misuse the technology. We are sensitive and think about the societal impact of what this technology can do. I think the impact of this could be way more than search, because we're talking about, at least in the short term, humans getting displaced from their jobs, from their livelihood. So I hope we do it in a sensitive, in an appropriate way, not to disrupt our lives. I mean, we are building technology for the good of mankind, so we should keep that in mind.
You have to disagree with everybody.
No, I don't disagree with everybody. Basically, I think I'm also very bullish. I think as an AI researcher, I've always been interested in this thing, and not necessarily the chatbots, but AI in general. I think it's going to be very good days, and I think we should have lots of sort of assistants around us and to help us to make everybody's life much easier. That's for sure. The thing I'm a little bit sort of not worried about it, but it's more of sort of interesting points. I think one is the communication skill of people, because we now have person-to-person communication. Now everybody have really realized, right? Everybody just have that cell phone, and then everybody is looking at the phone, not talking to people. But this thing is going to become worse, right? When you have the assistant, you don't need to talk to whatever people, right? You just ask this guy. I mean, later if you go even further, this guy knows your intention, right? You don't even need to talk to this guy. Then we don't need the language anymore. And also regarding this AI winter, I don't think it's going to happen this time. Part of the reason is we reached that point already. We sort of advanced computer science reached that point. It's not going to go back to say we're not going to do this thing anymore. If you think about the other areas, right? I mean, what are other areas? It's not like many years ago the machine learning algorithm is still no good. That sort of thing is still no good. But now we reach that technology sort of that place. You have to go forward. I don't think it's going to say, oh, it's going to go down. You're going to dig holes or something, do something else. I don't think so.
Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for all of the engagement and the comments and the interest, and thanks to the panelists for insights and drama and Games of Thrones references. And have a great conference, everybody.
Thank you.